Welcome to another deep dive today. Today we'll be looking closely at the Faroe Islands. Between 1380 and 1814 AD, really a fascinating period in their history.
Yeah.
And if you're enjoying these deep dives, be sure to check out the Pals Fundamentals YouTube channel.
Yeah, they've got a ton of great videos on Faroe's history and current events, too.
Yeah. All right, so let's set the stage. The year is 1380, and the Faroe Islands are under Norwegian rule, but that's about to change with the formation of the Kalmar Union.
Right. The Kalmar Union brought together Denmark, Norway, which at this time includes the Faroe Islands, of course,
Yeah.
and Sweden under one monarch.
Okay.
So it was intended to be a partnership, but Denmark gradually took the reins and began centralizing power in Copenhagen.
Mm-hmm.
And so what this meant for the Faroes was that decisions were increasingly made from afar, often without direct input from the islanders.
They were really starting to feel the impact of this centralization,
Yeah.
even though they were far away.
Exactly.
And then if that political upheaval wasn't enough, the Black Death arrives on these isolated islands around 1349 to 1350.
Yeah, and I mean, the Black Death's impact was devastating. I mean, historians estimate that it might have wiped out half or more of the Faroes' population.
Wow.
Yeah, leading to abandoned farms and a sharp decline in agricultural production. I mean, the ripple effects of this demographic shock would be felt for generations to come.
And if you're interested in reading more about the Black Death and its effects on the Faroe Islands, Pell's Fundamentals has a great video dedicated to that.
Absolutely.
Okay, so moving into the 16th century, the Faroe Islands, like much of Europe, experienced a major shift with the Reformation around 1538.
Right. With the Reformation, you saw a complete reshaping of religious and political authority. The Catholic Church had held significant influence and land ownership in the Faroes, and they were stripped of that power. And those assets were transferred to the Danish crown.
Okay.
And this really was a major turning point in the island's governance.
Yeah, so the last Catholic bishop, Amdur Olafsson, actively resisted this change, but he was ultimately deposed. And the Protestant Reformation really took hold in the Faroe Islands. And it wasn't just religion. This period saw the Danish crown further tightening its control over trade.
Yeah.
And administration in the Faroes.
Exactly. A key development during this time was the establishment of a trade monopoly by the Danish crown.
Okay.
And this monopoly granted exclusive rights to Danish merchants to trade with the Faroe Islands, severely restricting the islanders' ability to engage in independent commerce. And this would go on to shape their economic reality for centuries to come.
Wow.
And to learn more about the trade monopoly, check out Pals Fundamentals' YouTube channel. They have some really great resources on there.
So you've got political centralization, religious upheaval, and now a restrictive trade monopoly. Life in the Faroe Islands was being increasingly shaped by external forces. But things are about to take an even more challenging turn with the arrival of Christopher Gable in 1655.
Right. So Gable's rule lasted until 1709. And it's widely considered a particularly difficult chapter. In Faroese history, so he and later his son, were granted a hereditary fiefdom over the islands by the Danish king.
Okay.
And this essentially meant they ruled the Faroes for personal gain.
Oh, wow. What exactly did this fiefdom entail, and how did it impact the islanders?
Well, a fiefdom essentially meant the Gables were granted control over the Faroe Islands as their personal domain. They exerted this control by imposing heavy taxes, charging inflated prices for goods brought in from Denmark, and paying extremely low prices for Faroese products, particularly wool.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and if you're interested in learning more about this complex system, I highly recommend checking out the resources on Pals Fundamentals' YouTube channel.
It sounds like a system designed to benefit the Gables at the expense of the Faroes people.
It was, and it really led to widespread poverty and discontent. And to make matters worse, the Faroese people were also vulnerable to pirate attacks during this time.
Pirates. That sounds like something out of an adventure novel.
Well, it was a harsh reality. For many coastal communities, North African corsairs, particularly those from Algiers, would raid settlements, disrupt trade, and even capture islanders to sell into slavery.
Oh, wow. I mean, that's a stark reminder of the precariousness of life on these isolated islands.
Yeah.
During this era.
Yeah, it really is. And one particularly harrowing event, the Turkish raid of 1629, saw Algerian pirates attacking the island of Suðuroy, specifically the village of Svalbard. And they took numerous captives who were then sold into slavery.
That's awful.
Yeah, it really is. And this raid serves as a chilling testament to the very real dangers faced by the Faroese people. If you're looking for more information on this period, including accounts of the piracy and its impact, be sure to check out the resources on Pals Fundamentals YouTube channel.
Okay, so we've got the Gables' oppressive rule and the constant threat of pirate attacks. It's incredible to think about how the Faroese people endured these hardships. But as we move into the 18th century, do things start to look up for the Faroese people?
Well, in 1709, the Gable fiefdom was finally abolished, largely due to the disastrous consequences of their rule, and the Faroe Islands returned to direct royal administration under the Danish crown.
That sounds like a positive step, but was it really a change for the better?
Yeah, that's a good question. While the Gables were gone, their legacy of hardship continued in some ways. The royal trade monopoly, which had been a source of frustration for decades, remained firmly in place.
Okay.
And this meant that despite the end of the Gables' direct rule, the Faroes' economy was still heavily restricted by policies designed to benefit Danish merchants.
It sounds like they traded one form of control for another. Were there any attempts to reform this system during the 18th century?
Well, there were initiatives aimed at improving agriculture and fisheries, but the overarching trade monopoly continued to hinder real economic progress for the Faroese people.
Yeah.
This era was marked by contradictions. On one hand, efforts were made to improve conditions on the islands, but on the other, economic policies continued to limit their potential.
It must have been frustrating for the islanders to see these glimmers of hope, only to be held back by this restrictive trade system.
It was, and it was during this time that a remarkable figure emerged, Nolsoyar Paul, a national hero of the Faroe Islands.
Tell me more about him. What made him stand out?
Well, Nolsoyar Paul was a visionary and a courageous advocate for his people. Recognizing the crippling effects of the trade monopoly, he dared to challenge it directly. He wasn't content with simply complaining. He took action. Nolsoyar Paul built his own ship, the Roynden Frida, which translates to the Beautiful Trial, and attempted to establish independent trade routes, breaking free from the shackles of the Danish monopoly.
Wow, that's an incredible story of resilience and determination. It sounds like he truly embodied the spirit of the Faroese people, refusing to be held back by external forces.
He did. He believed in the potential of the Faroese people and their right to chart their own course, economically and otherwise. Sadly, his efforts were met with resistance from the Danish authorities, who were determined to maintain their control over the island's economy. And if you want to explore the fascinating story of Nolsoyar Paul's struggle against the monopoly in more detail, Pals Fundamentals offers a wealth of resources on their YouTube channel.
That's great. His story reminds me of other individuals throughout history who dared to challenge the status quo, fighting for the betterment of their communities. As we approach the end of this era, I'm curious to know how the Napoleonic Wars, which engulfed Europe in the early 19th century, impacted the Faroe Islands.
Yeah, well, the Napoleonic Wars had a profound impact on the Faroe Islands, particularly the Treaty of Kiel, which was signed in 1814. This treaty redrew the map of Europe following Napoleon's defeat, and Denmark-Norway, which had been allied with France during the war, faced consequences.
What were those consequences, and how did they reshape the Faroe Islands' destiny?
Well, the Treaty of Kiel had a direct impact on the Faroe Islands. Norway was ceded to Sweden, but the Faroe Islands, along with Iceland and Greenland, remained under Danish control. And this decision really marked a pivotal turning point for the islands. After centuries of being linked to Norway, their fate was now tied solely to Denmark. And this separation had long-lasting consequences, shaping the island's political, social, and cultural landscape for years to come.
It sounds like this period marked the beginning of a new chapter for the Faroe Islands, one filled with both challenges and opportunities. As we delve into the final part of our deep dive, I'm eager to explore how these events set the stage for the Faroe Islands' journey towards greater autonomy and self-determination. Welcome back to our deep dive into the history of the Faroe Islands. We've journeyed through centuries of change, from the era of the Kalmar Union and the challenges of the trade monopoly, to the emergence of figures like Nolsoyar Paul and the impact of the Napoleonic Wars.
Yeah, we have. And as we concluded Part 2, the Treaty of Kiel in 1814 really marked a significant turning point. The Faroe Islands, separated from Norway, remained under Danish control, setting the stage for the next chapter in their history.
This separation must have been a significant shift for the Faroes people. After centuries of being linked to Norway, how did this impact their sense of identity?
It's a complex question. The separation from Norway and the continuation of Danish rule undoubtedly contributed to a distinct Faroes identity. But it also sparked a growing sense of nationalism and a desire for greater autonomy and self-determination. This period laid the groundwork for the Faroe Islands' journey toward greater control over their own affairs.
It's fascinating how historical events can shape a nation's identity. What were some of the ways this burgeoning Faroese nationalism manifested itself?
Well, there was a renewed focus on Faroe's language and culture. A desire to preserve and celebrate their unique heritage emerged, leading to efforts to promote the Faroese language, which had been overshadowed by Danish for centuries. This cultural revival was a key element in fostering a sense of national unity and identity.
This reminds me of similar movements in other parts of the world, where people sought to reclaim their cultural heritage after periods of external influence. So although under Danish control, the seeds of Faroese nationalism were sown, setting the stage for future developments.
Exactly. And as we move beyond 1814 and into the 19th and 20th centuries, we see this nationalist sentiment gaining momentum. The desire for greater autonomy and self-governance continued to grow, leading to various political and social movements that shaped the Faroe Islands' modern history. And for those interested in delving deeper into this fascinating journey, Pal's Fundamentals on YouTube is a great resource for exploring Faroe's history and current affairs.
Well, it sounds like the events of 1380 to 1814 laid the foundation for the Faroe Islands we see today. It's a testament to the resilience and spirit of the Faroese people who navigated these turbulent times, forged a strong sense of identity, and continue to strive for greater self-determination. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the history of the Faroe Islands. It's a story that reminds us of the power of history to shape the present and the enduring human spirit that strives for autonomy and cultural preservation.